Hello there, and welcome to Town Meeting TV's Under the Dome, which is our coverage of the Vermont legislature. Thank you so much for tuning in here. Today we are talking about housing, an issue that has been recognized as a priority for every political party in Vermont, and that is top of mind for many of us. So to talk about that issue, we're joined by Representative Emily Krasnow and Senator Keisha Ram-Hinsdale, as well as a special guest on set today, representing the next generation of Vermonters. So thank you both so much for
This is
joining.
Mira, and sometimes we call her the 31st Senator because she ends up with me a lot.
Awesome. Great. Thank you both so much for joining. And we are going to start with just some introductions. So if you could both share just what committee you serve on, who you represent in the state, and what brought you to the legislature. So maybe we'll start with you, Emily.
Sure. Thank you so much for having us today. Rep. Emily Krasnow, and I serve on the House General and Housing Committee, and I serve South Burlington, Chittenden 9, and this is my first term. And so in our committee, our portfolio is, I often call it my dream portfolio, because we work on housing, social justice, and labor related bills, and then anything else that kind of can't fit in another committee. So we had like the state march, or other things that, and Senator Ram-Hinsdale is kind of on the sister committee in the Senate. So we get to collaborate and work on a lot of the same things. I grew up in Charlotte, and my dad was a state representative in the 90s, and then my sister served after him from Charlotte. And so I kind of grew up in the state house, and school breaks and other things, I was sitting there with my books on tape and watching everything. And when my dad passed away, I was really inspired to continue his important work for Vermont and our community. And I learned the importance of connecting with neighbors and knocking on doors from the age of 7 with my dad. So 2 years ago, when a seat opened up, I thought I'd really like to run. And one of the motivators for me to run for office was to work on our community and our state's housing crisis that really intersects with issues of climate change and other things that really affect folks in our community. So I bring the experience of being on South Burlington's Affordable Housing Trust Committee, and in the off session working at the South Burlington Food Shelf. So really seeing the direct impact of volunteering there and the needs that so many in our community and folks that have fallen behind. So I really wanted to bring that voice to Montpelier, and I'm so grateful to serve and excited to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Senator Keisha Ram-Hinsdale.
Thanks, Bobby. Well, first of all, it's fun to listen to Emily's story and realize it all comes full circle. Mira spends a lot of time with me in the State House, and hopefully one day she'll be on the campaign trail fully with me, not just in parades. But I am now in my 12th year in the legislature. I started on the House General and Housing Committee when I started in the House in 2009. And even then, I wanted to be on the Housing Committee because I was one of the only renters in the legislature. So it meant a lot to me to start working on security deposit withholdings, landlord-tenant law, just things that would create balance, but also help young Vermonters become homeowners. Too often I think we focus on just a certain type of housing, or helping people with their landlord-tenant law rights, which is important, but we need to also focus on a pathway for people to become homeowners, because that is what is contributing to the wealth gap that we have in the country, whether it's a generational wealth gap, a racial wealth gap, and just how people climb into the middle class and stay there. So I have always cared about housing, and now I chair Senate Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. I'm probably the only person who served on both the House and the Senate Housing Committee. Senators serve on 2 committees, which just makes our lives that much more difficult. And so I serve on Senate Finance in the afternoon. I also used to serve on House Ways and Means. So it's given me a great perspective on just some of the nuances of what's different when you look at an issue all day in a committee of between 10 and 12 people in the House versus kind of dropping in and out. And we have a big jurisdiction in economic development, housing, and general affairs. So in addition to housing being important to me, I have a reason all anew to be running and caring about what we do in the Vermont legislature. Thank you for her toy bag. Mira just turned 1, so I'm mom to a 1-year-old, and we have another on the way. I'm 21 weeks pregnant. Really putting families first, making sure that struggling families have a voice and someone who shares their perspective, because I can appreciate that it's really hard to fit into your day, also advocating to your legislator while you're juggling childcare and, having little ones.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad that both of you are here today.
Thank you. Yeah.
That's right.
Good addition.
So now we'll turn to a topic that is certainly top of mind. In Burlington, we've talked about emergency housing a lot in the last few years. And so this was an issue that was impacted quite a bit by the pandemic and pandemic-related funding that allowed for an increase in capacity in emergency housing. But now, with that funding gone, the state is having to adjust its approach to emergency housing. So maybe Senator Ram Hinsdale, can you just talk a little bit about where we're at with emergency housing and what the state is looking at for the next few months, the coming year, as far as our capacity to support those folks?
Yeah, so I think it's really valuable to start with recognizing that it is a national crisis. We just had the Pew Charitable Trust into our committee and into the legislature to talk about this. And I hope that people realize there's a really, really strong nexus between the availability of housing, then the cost of rental housing, and then the impact that has on homelessness. So if you have very little housing stock, which we do in Vermont and around the country, there are less than 600 homes for sale. There's a rental vacancy level of probably the lowest it's been in recent history, and home prices are higher than they've ever been. You are also driving up rent prices, and that has a very direct link to increases in homelessness. So within our national problem, Vermont was a leader in a more compassionate solution during the pandemic. Also recognizing that we just have some of the lowest housing stock per capita in the country, we then made sure that everyone who was maybe unhoused in the pandemic still had shelter. They still had a motel stay and the opportunity to be somewhere. So we have about 2,000 people in our motel system right now in our general assistance program. And over 600 are children. So this is a lot of families who are looking for a better option than staying in a motel. And at the same time, we need to keep that program going. So there will be 1,300 beds ongoing, I believe, is the latest proposal that's being negotiated. At the same time that we both have agreed to provisions that would allow motels turning into permanent housing to bypass permit processes. We've tried to put a historic amount of money into permanent housing solutions for folks. And my big issue, we are trying to untie the hands of developers and people who create housing for a living so that they can do it in a more cost-effective way and really house everyone. Every rung of the ladder, people are stuck. So we hear from people in the motels who would be renters. They simply cannot find something to rent. And then, those folks who are renting would like to buy a house, they can't afford it. Those who own a house would like to go into senior housing but can't find any. So really, we have just an incredibly backed up housing system that's not working for Vermonters.
And when you say you both have agreed to certain things, you're talking about the House and the Senate? Is that what you're talking about?
Without trying to speak for the House, I'm just trying to name areas where provisions are similar enough that they've passed in both chambers already, or they've made their way through most of the process. So while we are still likely to have some conference committees on issues like housing, there is already vast agreement, I think we can celebrate, on trying to move forward with new land use policies and regulatory reform, as well as look at strategic housing investments into the future and maintain our compassionate solutions in keeping folks in motels. I think the last thing we just have to recognize is when our motel units are full, that means other people can't access them. So, then you have a family facing domestic violence and they're told maybe in their county or statewide that there's not capacity for them. So, we just have to take a look at the whole system, and motels are expensive. We can't make those our best solution for folks. We need to increase housing vacancy and rental vacancy.
Thanks. Representative Krasnow, have you, what's your thinking on emergency housing? Have you heard anything from your constituents? What are you thinking about in this issue?
Yeah, so this is, another topic that I felt really needed a lot of work and discussion in the session. So in my experience working at the food shelf, I met families who have had children and babies who have only lived their lives now in hotels. And so folks would come in and ask, they'd have an ice chest, or if they could make an egg in a microwave, or, so we know that the hotel program is not a permanent solution. I believe that housing is a human right, and I think that the Housing First initiative has really been a beacon both across the country and in Vermont, and many of us in the legislature believe that that will be the next step to have, long-term success for our residents, because if you don't have the house first, other things can't come into play for you, whether it's substance use treatment or medical care, or being a successful kid in school. If you don't have a roof over your head, how can you meet your basic needs? So that's really been a focus for many of us. And while the General Assistance Hotel and program is not in the committee I serve on jurisdiction, it resides in Human Services. I've worked closely with colleagues every step of the way to make sure that we have the most humane transitions. Met with, we've had joint hearings with that committee and met with the administration. To me, it is unacceptable, no matter what, to have someone, with a disability or a child to be kicked out onto the street. And in South Burlington, we do have a lot of hotels as well. And just meeting with folks there and helping them navigate these systems, because many folks, our government systems are complicated and confusing if English is a second language, or if you need, you're working 2 jobs just to put food on the table. It can be challenging to navigate your next steps. So really just staying connected with my community and those members. They are my constituents as well. I've been excited to see some of the hotels right near me on Williston Road turn into now permanent housing. I think that is an amazing solution, and people will be able to have their own space and their own home. So currently I believe there will be a committee of conference with the House and Senate committees talking about and finding, I think we're almost on the same page. There are some tweaks that they'll be discussing over the next week or so before they finalize the plan. But, the administration has had years to kind of show us a plan and to come to the table. And many of the conversations we had kind of felt like deja vu, where we were just having the same conversations again and again. And I really want to see long-term planning going forward, because this Band-Aid approach is not working for anyone and for our state fiscally as well. So over the next week, I think we'll see a lot more come to light after the House and Senate have their conference committee, and we'll decide what we think when they come out.
And just as a matter of the amount of resources that are available to the state and compared to the need, should we expect to see in Burlington that in the coming fiscal year, the amount of beds that will be available will be less than the amount of people seeking this emergency shelter? And do we have an idea of where those folks might live if we can't support that full capacity of those folks?
I can take a first shot at that, and Mira would definitely like us to finish on time so she can have her mom back. So one thing that has been a frustration, I think, throughout the legislature is not having great numbers around this issue, not knowing who exactly we're helping and how many people need a skilled nursing facility versus, family housing. Versus, some other solution. So we can't really say for sure how close we'll get to solving the problem because it is one that keeps growing. When I started my housing work last year, we had less than 1,000 housing listings in the state. Now it's less than 600. So that ladder that people can't climb is still pushing people down and making it hard for folks. There are VPs of the hospital who are also staying in hotels and motels because they can't find a place to live. Obviously, a very different situation, but we're stretching that capacity as much as we can. And we have to recognize that some motels want to transition back to tourism. So we don't have a full say in how many emergency beds we might have available. There's over $10 million that I think is being discussed between our two appropriations committees for more shelter capacity, for more options that are both congregate and non-congregate shelter housing, but also for the right types of care that people need. And I think we all wish we had better numbers there, because some people really need much more care and support than a motel room or a shelter bed.
Great. Awesome. Thank you both so much. Yeah. And thank you, Mira, for those thoughts as well.
Yes.
So we will move on to just thinking more long-term about investing in our housing stock. So Representative Krasnow, can you talk a little bit about a bill that came out of the House that tries to do that, H.829, I think it started as. I don't know what it is now, but.
Yes, I can. So I'm really proud of the committee that I serve on's work on this bill. It really set up a long-term vision that was really bold, because at this point in time, we need that. We need bold vision and planning and to move forward. If we continue, each year to come up with this and that, I really think that while we need both regulatory reform changes, I've been, often going around saying to folks that I really believe that we need this, and that in the very unique challenges that we're in today, and we can talk next about Act 250, but if we just did regulatory reform, I believe that will not be enough to solve our housing crisis, especially for affordable housing. There's many developers and folks who have built in South Burlington that needed that extra push to get them over the line to finish the project. The costs of building and materials have skyrocketed in the last couple of years to a point that if we're going to have affordable housing units, they need that extra assistance. In the district that I represent, we have had hundreds of new units go online, both affordable and market rate and many renter options as well. But many of those projects needed that extra boost. And on the committee that I also serve on in South Burlington, the Housing Trust, we were able to help some of those projects as well. But many communities don't have those options and that structure that places like Burlington or South Burlington do. So we took, this was our big bill that we worked on this year that had a lot, that we heard, hours and hours of testimony from people with lived experience who were struggling, to developers, to everyone in between. And for me, Senator Rom Hinsdale mentioned about senior housing and other things like that. It's really critical that we continue to build housing that meets the needs for everyone. And so next door to me, I have a low-income senior housing, and they have, huge wait lists. And so when I go over there and play bingo, I'm hearing from folks who have friends or other people that they know who want to come to their community, but often those projects need extra assistance. So even if we just had regulatory, reform, those important pieces of the housing crisis puzzle might lag and could take years to continue, and we don't want that to be stalled. So my approach has been yes, we need extreme measures taken to reduce the regulatory barriers, but we also need to maintain investing in important projects and services that help our lowest income community members as well. So that's kind of what our committee worked on. Then it went on to the Ways and Means Committee, where they, added some revenue sources, because we cannot just, find that in the sky. We have to, if we're serious about our housing crisis and coming out of this, we have to find revenue. So it's my philosophy that when our wealthiest pay their fair share, it helps folks across the state that need it most. And so that proposal was put in there for a surcharge on our highest income earners. And, there was a lot of data and discussion about how we got to certain numbers and a lot of work that went into that. So that was kind of my philosophy. Also, the property transfer tax was in there. And many of us, myself included, worked really hard to actually raise it to $750. I advocated that 600 number was too low, because if you look around in South Burlington or Chittenden County, $600,000 is not really workable. So I was grateful that the committee took that response and raised it so that it could be more on par with today's real estate prices. And we got to that number. The bill has now gone over to the Senate, and so we'll definitely hear from Senator Rom Hinsdale on that. But I was really proud of the work that went into it, and working with a variety of stakeholders that represented a long-term vision for the housing crisis that was very bold.
Thank you so much. So, Senator Rom Hinsdale, can you talk about where this bill is on the Senate side?
Yeah. I often try not to pay attention to the bill numbers, and I think I advise a lot of my constituents to do the same. It obviously is hard to follow, but 3 housing-related or regulatory-related bills came over from the House. We already had 2 housing and regulatory bills in the Senate. We're working on combining all of them at this point, and that's a conversation that includes the Finance Committee, just like their Ways and Means Committee, as well as Senate Appropriations. I don't think anybody disagrees, and certainly not me, on the need for money for housing. In fact, the Senate Finance just voted out 7-0 on Friday, a property transfer tax. So if folks know, this is a one-time tax you pay on the purchase of a home, but instead of doing it on properties over $750,000, we just did it on the purchase of a second home. And what that looks like is seeking out someone's word that they're doing that, but then verifying it with either a landlord certificate or a homestead declaration that says they are either using it as their personal homestead or they're renting it long-term to someone. And one of the biggest issues I had, and I expressed it to the chair of Ways and Means, with the tax on properties over $750,000 is that includes a lot of multifamily housing. You know, multifamily housing carries a bigger price tag, and there was no exemption when you were trying to buy something that then costs would end up being passed on to a renter or multiple renting families. So I think our second home property transfer tax is going to be successful. And with that in place and the appropriations we're putting forward that are about to be voted on by Senate appropriations, the Senate will have invested more money in affordable and long-term housing in the FY25 budget. And that's than the House did. And that's an important distinction. It's very confusing to folks. Don't want that bottle. But do you want the bottle? She's like, Mama's just talking too much. And Mama said this over and over again. But the FY25 budget starts in July of 2024 and extends through the end of June of 2025. That's the budget year we're about to enter into. And we have more appropriations for housing in that budget. The income tax proposal from the House wouldn't take effect until halfway into 2025 in the FY26 budget. And the important distinction there is we have an election coming up. People want taxing capacity for paid family leave. They want taxing capacity for, conservation, environmental programs, childcare, just supporting seniors. If we have another flood, that took up a huge chunk of our budget this year. So I've been around long enough that I wouldn't feel comfortable saying, here's how we're going to spend money in 2 years. Of course, I want money for housing, and we should start that discussion right away when we have a new legislature seated next January. But, with everything that people want to spend money on, we'd be giving away next year's taxing capacity without really being able to ask that legislature what they think.
Okay, thank you both so much. Mira's saying we got to get a move on, so we're moving on to Act 250. So Act 250 is the establishes the statewide development review process, and there have been some proposed changes to that process that change what projects actually trigger the state's development review process, among some other things. So would either of you, I don't know which of you is best positioned to speak on this.
You can always go first just to...
Well, I have opinions. I'll let you go
okay.
first. It's fine.
Should I go ahead?
Go for it.
Okay. Yep. Are you ready to listen to me talk about Act 250 again? How do you feel about that?
It's Act 250 again, Mira.
No, she's definitely learned what that is. I feel like that's going to be one of her first words.
Oh, God.
So we should level set that, Act 250 is a landmark land use planning framework that we've had in the state for 50 years. And it has served us well. When people say, oh my gosh, what a beautiful state with these cows dotting working landscapes and 80% forested and compact village settlements, that's not by accident. Act 250 helped us achieve a lot of that. Act 250, now is unfortunately having the effect of excluding people from our village settlements rather than welcoming them in. So, what I try to say is compact village settlement doesn't mean gated community. It shouldn't mean that you can reduce the density. Thank you. I have someone on the set who's going to try and help me, but I got it. Moms can multitask. I often like to say that a municipality could kill a project. Act 250 can really cut down its density, make it single-family homes instead of multifamily housing, and thereby make it a lot more expensive. And the reality is, where we're not questioning the land use, we don't need Act 250 to tell us what to do. If you have a designated downtown, a neighborhood growth center, a lot of these areas that communities have designated for housing growth, Act 250 is unfortunately then used as a bludgeon, a way to stop a project, to appeal it twice to the Supreme Court, once on the municipal side, once on the Act 250 side. And, it's really what a lot of housing providers, even our affordable housing developers, would say has become the biggest delay in getting affordable housing built. Of course, add to that labor costs and material costs, but those go up the more uncertain your project is. So pretty much now you have to have millions of dollars in the bank in order to get your project started. And that stops a lot of people from creating a mom and pop multifamily project. Even ADUs get stuck in Act 250. So our bill this year has ADUs, by right, accessory dwelling units. So you can build a small detached, structure for a family member or, something attached to your house or a duplex without running into these regulatory hurdles.
Right. And so this year's reforms to that is intend to lift some of the. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that actually will work? If this is passed?
Yeah, we can. We can say that. Basically, in the short term, we need housing now. I think everyone recognizes that. 5,000 households experienced damage in the floods of July and December. And many are living in impaired housing with no other options. That is on top of a housing crisis that we already had. So we need to really fast track the exemptions that would allow us to deduplicate from having Act 250 involved in our major designated areas. There aren't that many of them. There are places like our downtowns, our neighborhood growth areas, our designated growth centers, and then we have an increased cap on the number of units you can build without Act 250 intervention in village centers, of which we have 240, and you could build up to 50 units there. Those kinds of things, coupled with a few other exemptions and other investments, really helps make sure that we're not just building in our biggest downtowns. That we're recognizing that rural folks want a senior clustered housing development. They don't want to be pushed into a high-rise in Burlington if they live in a rural place right now. Is that what Mama sounds like?
Thank you, Senator. Representative Krasnow, what are your thoughts on Act 250 and the reforms proposed right now?
Yeah, so I grew up in a rural part of Vermont, and the quintessential, as described, with the cows and the land and much of that. And I've lived in South Burlington for 18 years now, in a condo in a dense area where so I kind of have experience with folks on both sides. Me personally, I knew that it was critical that this would be one of the most important things that we worked on this year. I signed on to all the bill numbers, 719, was it?
Yeah.
719, H719, which was kind of an omnibus bill that had quad partisan support in the beginning of the session to really push the conversation around Act 250 reform. I do agree that, too often, and we represent, I represent a very dense part of Chittenden County, and which is in your district as well. There are folks that have been left out of the conversation across the state and who are asking for these measures to so I knew that would be a very important part of our legislative agenda and needed to be. Probably one of the most important things that we all worked on this year. So, the bill that the House Environment and Energy Committee put to the House floor did end up with some amendments that I felt made it stronger. The bill, to me, does help where I represent and much of parts of Chittenden County, and that's where I represent. So those are the voices. I'm not a statewide office holder. However, when you serve in the state, the state house, and especially when housing is your main focus, you do have attention to everyone in the state. And so I think that I'll be waiting to see how the Senate, I feel like I'm a compromiser, a bridge builder, and a collaborator. So I'm excited to see what the Senate does with those bills, and hoping, while I did support the House version, I'd like to see some changes as well, but I'm excited to see what they do and with those measures. But for my community, it really met our goals and needs. I think South Burlington is an excellent example of, having those dense communities. I get so excited when I see a crane, in my window, because it means a roof over someone's head is going up. To that point, we've had hundreds of new units go up in my district, and they were full before they even hit the market. So the need is great. We're going to keep building. I think South Burlington has done a huge share of the development across the state. Market Street near our library is, wall to wall with housing. And so I truly believe in these Act 250 reform measures. And as we know, we can't build housing in the sky, so they have to work in conjunction with the other services and other things. So I'm looking forward to seeing how things turn out. Like Senator Hinsdale said, there's a few bills that are being mashed kind of together, but I truthfully believe that we'll end up with what's best for everyone, and I will support that wholeheartedly, because it just means more roofs over people's head. I did quickly want to talk about a bill that I introduced in January that I think really is critical to all of these conversations. So H686 was, again, I like saying quad partisan, because we have Democrat, Republican, independents, and progressives that all supported this bill after it was introduced. And so I really believe in government accountability and transparency and data. So when we serve on the committees that we serve on, we have testimony and people have their own feelings, but I really felt that it would be important, if we're going to meet the goals and targets by 2030 of what we're told that we need from places like Vermont Housing Finance Agency and our administration, then we have to get those accurate numbers. And waiting, for them is too long. So we need them, every year, really bringing to the table what we're doing, what we need to be doing, and where we can fill those gaps. So that was a priority bill for myself and others to work on, and I'm excited that it continued and had some legs, as they say, to move along. But I just think that it's so important that we put our money where our mouth is, and if we're serious about solving the housing crisis, that we continue to do so in a way that is accurately informed. And this directs the Housing Division to work with our regional planning commissions. And this is something that in Chittenden County, our regional planning commission has really asked for as well. So they would partner with them to really get a region by region accurate picture of what we're doing and what we need to be doing. So that was something that I think will help all of these housing bills anchored with important data.
Okay. Senator, anything to add here before we wrap up? I'm seeing the bottles empty,
Yes.
so our time has run out here.
That's our big
Bottles out.
Just to say that housing is so cross-cutting in so many ways. We heard about housing as a social determinant of health. We heard about housing as a great stabilizer, something that helps make sure kids have a place to do their homework and seniors have a place that folks can call to coordinate their medical care. We also have what people would consider a affordability crisis in our property taxes. That is a housing issue in that people might just up and sell their homes and turn those into second homes if they can't continue to afford their property taxes. but I hope people can appreciate that the more we grow our grand list, that is one of the biggest levers we can pull to reduce people's property tax rates, is to share the burden and spread that across more households while also getting more kids into our schools. So one of the things that we hear from a lot of our smaller rural towns is, you know, you're telling us that you're taking our school away because we don't have enough kids, but we don't have enough kids because we don't have enough housing for families to move into. So you're kind of putting us in a death spiral. And that point hit me really hard as someone who represents the more populated part of the state, is, you know, that our rural areas don't want to be preserved in amber. And so I've tried really hard to make sure we continue to hear their voices in this process. And finally, building more housing where employment is, South Burlington being the largest employment corridor now in the state, helps us with our climate change goals. Right now you have hospital workers and people doing large-scale manufacturing who are commuting several towns, if not several counties away to get to work. That is bad for the environment. You know, so when I first went to the Natural Resources Committee to talk about these issues, you know, I opened with our favorite Vermonter, Bill McKibben's article from Mother Jones, Yes in My Backyard, No Really, because we absolutely need to start thinking less provincially and more about our state needs and what's going to happen when we have climate refugees from out of the state, let alone from within the state, and how we make sure people don't need to rely on single occupancy vehicles to get to work every day. So I hope transportation is the next conversation the legislature tackles in a big statewide way.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, do you want to add anything?
Thank you. I'll add that. I really agree with everything Senator Hinsdale said. I think housing is a social determinant of health, and it's intersected with, you know, healthcare, climate change. I also would like to really talk more about transportation. And, you know, one of the things we talk about with the new affordable units going up is, well, is it on a bus line? Is it there? And so it's so important that those work in conjunction. I think that will be a great next step for folks. And it really, you know, what you said about climate really resonates with me and many folks in our community, that, you know, I have many friends who have to travel great distances to their jobs, and we need housing where those jobs are. We need housing where they are. We need it everywhere. But that is a critically important piece as well. And so I appreciate those comments around the climate crisis too.
Okay, Representative Emily Krasnow and Senator Keisha Hinsdale, thank you so much for joining us.
And Mira.
And our honorary senator, anything else to add here?
Do you want to say something? Now you go quiet. But really thank you everyone in the studio, especially Representative Krasnow, who's trying to talk about some weighty stuff with a screaming baby toddler. But, you know, thank you to Mira too. She's put up with a lot of these conversations. There aren't enough working moms in the legislature right now. We need to change that. It is an election season coming up, and I hope people will run for office. Right?
And can I just, I also want to thank CCTV for having this, and so that we can really connect with folks across Chittenden County to discuss these important topics. It's really a wonderful, it's really wonderful. Thank you.
You want to clap
Thank
for everybody?
you both so much.
Clap, 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 clap. You're getting shy.
You did great.
Thank you both so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you for tuning in to Under the Dome from Town Meeting TV. You can find this and many more episodes of our coverage of the legislature on cctv.org and on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much.